Hello and welcome back to the Green Workbench. Today we're going to be starting an end grain cutting board. So I went down to the local lumberyard to pick up some wood. You want to get a hardwood with a close grain, so oak is not a very good choice. So I picked up some maple, some walnut, and some cherry in these thick blocks. And the great thing about it is because I just got these shorts, they were on sale, and usually you can get a good deal on shorts because they're just end pieces of boards that someone else didn't want and the lumberyard is trying to get rid of. So check it out and see if you can find something for a good price. So the first step is I need to plane these. I don't have a planer, so you can use a hand planer if you want. I actually though have a friend who's got a nice shop, so I'm going to go over and use his planer and joiner and square these up, because you need tight glue joints on your cutting board, so you want to make sure all your edges are perfectly square and straight so that it glues together well. So I'm going to go over to his house and get those prepped, and then we'll come back and we'll start work on putting it together. Alright, so I planed and jointed my boards, which was really nice, and then he also has a nice table saw, so I ended up ripping my boards there as well. So to rip them, you can do any dimension that you want. I did some at 2 inches, some at 1.5 inches, and then one even smaller than that. It just creates a different pattern, so you can plan it out how you want your pattern to be, you know, whether you want to go from 2 to 1.5 to 1, back to whatever you want. So make your cuts and plan out your pattern. So this is going to be my cutting board, except for it'll be on the end grain, but first we need to glue the pieces together on the edge. So a couple different ways to do it. If all of your boards are the same length or as long as you want it, then you're going to make it longer rather than wider. Mine is the opposite because my maple board was pretty short. So my cuts will be going the other way. The problem with that is that in order to make, once they're glued together, I'm going to have to cross-cut these pieces, and I either have to go back to my friend's to use his table saw because he has a nice miter sled and a larger table, or I do it in 2 parts. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to glue up this section and glue up this section, and like I'm making 2 separate cutting boards, and at the very end I'll use biscuits to join those 2 small cutting boards together into one large cutting board. So I'm going to trim these ends down here. It's not a big deal, but it'll help me glue it up better if they're closer to the same. So I won't go, I'm not worried about being flush, just close to it, because I'll do that final cut after it's glued together. So I'm going to chop off these ends, and then I'm going to prep to glue. Okay, I've set up the first one in my clamp. So clamp straight. So first thing I'm going to do is turn that all to the right for my gluing surface. Except for the last one here. And I'm using just Titebond 3. Use 2 or 3. Just needs to be the waterproof version, because, well, it's a cutting board, it's going to be getting wet. So I'm going to roll it on. Be generous with your glue. We're okay with it squeezing out. Alright, they're glued. I'm just lining them up, trying to get my clamp straight. Doesn't have to be perfect here. Okay. Trying to make sure these are even. Alright, now the best way to do that is we're going to clamp a piece across the top, so we'll do that now. Okay, so what I've done to make sure that we're smooth across the top here, I've taken 2 pieces of hardwood, covered them with the tape so that they don't stick to the board. One on the top, one on the bottom. If you know your clamps are straight, you can just do one on the top and glue it to the clamp. I don't trust my clamps. So I'm going to, there we go. Clamp that down there. The same for the other side. Looking good. Okay. I don't want it to clamp so tight that all my glue comes out, but I also want a good flush joint. So that looks good. So now I'll do my other side. Okay, so I took it out of the clamps. I sanded down to make sure it was perfectly even, or you could run it through the planer again, but you need to get any glue drops off, make sure it's perfectly even. And then using a miter sled on my table saw, or if you've got a good sliding compound miter saw, measured out 2 inches and started making my cross cuts. So basically making my cross cut all the way across the piece, you stand it up on its end grain, and that's how it's going to fit. And we'll arrange our pattern later, put it all together. But I can continue running the board through crosscut saw, whichever saw you're using, to create all of our pieces. And you can go 1.5 inches, 2 inches, whatever you want to get the height. 2 inches is probably on the tall side, but it actually works out so it's a good size cutting board. If I leave it at the 2 inches, I like it that way. It works for me, but you can go with 1 inch or 1.5 inches, which will extend the length of your board any way you want to do it. But remember, this is thick hardwood, so you're going to need a saw with the horsepower to cut through this. So make sure you set it up, everything properly beforehand. I got a good idea of how it was going to work when I trimmed off the ends to square it up before I started. So that's probably a good idea to make sure that your saw can handle it. So we'll continue walking through those cross cuts until we're ready to start putting it together and gluing it. I've got them all cut out and laid out the way I want them. I did it so that the two end pieces are a little bit shorter. That way it provides kind of a handle when you're picking it up off the table. But it can also still be used on both sides. So I've got the layout. Now the choice is you can glue it all up in one piece or glue in two pieces. And the consideration you need to make is that you're going to want to clean up after it's glued. You're going to have to clean up the edge. But that's going to be difficult. If you do it in two pieces, it will be difficult to do and get it perfect if you try doing them separate and putting it together. Your best bet is to glue it all together first and then find a way to trim the entire thing at once. And if you have a table saw large enough, that's not a problem, but it's a cross cut, so you can't just run it along the fence or you'll get kickback. So I'm going to work on gluing these together, make sure I have a nice flat surface underneath so that my pieces are perfectly flat, at least on one side, and so when I get it done I'm only having to sand or plane the top or the bottom, one of the sides, to make it perfectly even. And you want to make sure that you get a good tight glue joint spread. Again, you're using the waterproof glue, so I'm using Titebond 3 or 2 would work as well, and use it liberally and really get a good tight clamp all the way across, because you don't want any spaces in your piece. So we'll go ahead and glue it up. Alright, we are all clamped up tight and ready to let it sit overnight and dry. I put some parchment paper underneath so it wouldn't stick. And we've got our cross piece to keep them all flat. Clamp from the top and the bottom. You want a tight fit, but not so tight you squeeze all the glue out. And then set it aside and let it dry. Okay, we let it glue overnight. It's all glued up. So now we need to even our surface out. A couple ways you can do that. Your planer, a drum sander actually would be the best way to do it, but I do not have one of those. You can use a planer, electric or hand. I'm actually going to use a belt sander with a pretty rough grit, and I will sand it flat. With the belt sander you have to be careful that you're not sanding dips into it. You keep it moving, keep it nice and even all the way across. It's not too bad, so that should actually go pretty quickly. Get both sides sanded down. We'll start with that rough grit and then move our way up until we're smooth. I'll probably end at 120 now because I have a few more things to do before I hit it with the 220 when it's ready to be finished. So we'll start sanding. Another option is to plane your piece with a router sled, and you can make one really easily. And basically it just slides back and forth, starting at the lowest point on your piece, and you route all the way across back and forth until the whole thing is the same level. They're really easy to make. You can find how-tos on YouTube if you want to learn how to make one, but pretty self-explanatory. And anyway, that's another good way to plane it if you don't have a full-size planer. Got it rough sanded, and I also squared all the edges. Best way to do that is with a miter sled for the table saw. So now I'm going to take a roundover bit. This is a 3/8 inch roundover, and I'm going to round all of the edges. And want to be careful. I'll probably put a block on the edges to avoid cutout or tearing away. So I'm going to carefully route around the entire thing on both sides. So after I had everything trimmed up and the edges routed and rounded, it was time to start sanding. End grain is always tough to sand, so you're in for a good sanding session. So I started actually with the belt sander to even everything out with a really rough grit. I started at 40, and then I went to an orbital sander at 60, 80, 120, and then 220. So now it's smooth as glass. So make sure everything's rounded as you want it and sanded the way you want it, that it's nice and smooth, and then it's time to finish. So you have different options when you go to finish it. You can use a salad bowl varnish, mineral oil, or you can buy an oil. I'm going to use this conditioner that's a mix of wax and oil, and you want to rub it in very generously. It's going to really soak it up. It's going to be really thirsty to start, so be generous, rub it in, let it soak in, and then put another coat. You're going to need a few coats on it until it stops soaking it up. Once it stops, then you're good to go. And just every few weeks or so, you want to condition it up again, and it'll be ready to use. You can find the directions on your conditioner, but you can use water to clean it and soap, and then you just put a light spread of the conditioner, or just a mineral oil that you can get really cheap at the grocery store. You can go that route as well. So I'm going to go ahead and start finishing it, and then we'll see what it looks like at the end. This is after just the first coat. I'm letting it sit for 2-3 minutes. It's already soaking it up. So I'll wait another minute, put another coat on. Alright, we're finished. It took 3 very generous coats of the conditioner until it stopped drinking. It's turned out very nicely. So wipe it down. And you're ready to go. You have a great end grain cutting board. If with proper care, it should last you forever. Just make sure you keep conditioning it on a regular basis, and it should be great for your knives. It'll look great in your kitchen. So I hope you enjoyed this project. Please check out my other videos and lessons, and we'll see you again next time on the Green Workbench. Thanks for watching.